What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. In today's video, I'll be going over my 5 favorite players that have changed teams this offseason. A lot of the time, we avoid players who are changing teams. It's a new situation, maybe a new quarterback, offensive coordinator, and just a lot of unknowns. But sometimes players land in situations that are clear upgrades, and we should be targeting them in fantasy. So today I'll go for 5 players that fall into that category, and who knows, maybe we'll do the other side in another video maybe next week. All right, so let's get things started off as usual. The stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which tight end had the highest scoring week in fantasy last season. The answer is Darren Waller in any scoring format with 13 receptions, 200 yards, and 2 touchdowns in week 13 against the Jets. And permitted underscores, first to get that right on YouTube, and at JulianPD19 was the first to get that on Twitter. Today's stat, sticking with tight ends. Kelsey and Waller scored the most and second most fantasy points from week 6 on last season, but who scored the third most? All right, so let's talk about some players changing teams. First up, we have Curtis Samuel. He has kind of been a favorite of ours over the past few seasons, but he's been like a semi-bust so far, having yet to eclipse 875 receiving yards. He was a young rookie though, so despite entering his 5th season, he's still just going to turn 25 in August. So he's still 24 years old right now, entering his 5th year. That's kind of crazy. And over his 4-year career, he's been like a really good wide receiver. Very talented route runner, can gain separation. It just hadn't really translated into fantasy production until last season. And to be fair, his quarterbacks have been Newton, who's like fine and was fine when he was his quarterback, but doesn't really support fantasy relevant wide receivers. He's had Tyler Heineke, Kyle Allen, Will Grier, Teddy Bridgewater, of course, and Phillip Walker. So not exactly like a star-studded cast of passing weapons. Like Newton's obviously the best of that group, but he's not known for being just the greatest passer, right? But last season we did get a glimpse into what Samuel could be. And we started off a little bit slow, but did turn it around in week 7 on, really finishing as a wide receiver 12 in points per game from week 7 through the end of the season, just 0.3 points per game behind Justin Jefferson, ahead of guys like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Lockett, Metcalf, Thielen, Julio. I mean, the list just goes on and on of players who he outperformed for a good chunk of the season. Remember, week 7 on. That's not like, week 13 on, he was better than these guys. For a good chunk of the year, he was really, really good. And remember, that was with, Teddy Bridgewater, who I think we can all agree is below average. I mean, he threw for over 285 yards only once over those 10 games. Now, I don't want to sit here and say that Ryan Fitzpatrick is just an elite quarterback. He's not. But he's great in fantasy. And he actually makes this list as well, if we're being honest. Since 2014, when his team has allowed him to throw the ball at least 35 times, which is super conservative since it would have ranked 18th last year. 3 attempts per game lower than Washington gave the combination of Alex Smith, Haskin, and Kyle Allen. So a very conservative estimate here. He's got 32 of those games, averaging 18.6 fantasy points per game. And that sort of production would rank 13th among quarterbacks last season. And that's including a negative 2-point game on the Jets in 2016. Make that even 10 points, and he's up to 19 points per game on average. And now, look at his weapons. I already talked about Curtis Samuel. I think he's a fantastic talent. He's going to gel extremely well with Ryan Fitzpatrick. But they've also got Terry McLaurin. They've also got Logan Thomas, Antonio Gibson, and they've got Ron Rivera at head coach, who is one of the coaches we trust will put his players in position to succeed. There are a lot of head coaches out there that we, in fantasy, do not trust. If they've got a talent, we're like, listen, I don't know if they're going to get the most out of this talent. Ron Rivera is one we trust. If he's got talent on his roster, he's going to use that talent. So I am very bullish on Washington this season. And you know what? In best ball formats, they're a very inexpensive stack. So if you're playing on underdog, and of course using promo code FFA, then that is one that I would absolutely be targeting because it has a lot of upside. It doesn't need to even be Curtis Samuel. Stacking Ryan Fitzpatrick with Logan Thomas, with of course Curtis Samuel, but also Terry McLaurin, with all of these guys, I think that is an awesome stack, and it's not going to cost you all that much to get. So I think you guys should definitely be targeting that. But what about some non-Washington players? Well, as of right now, I'm still very bullish on Mike Davis. Their depth chart is absolute trash. So I think it is pretty clearly him at the top. And I've seen a lot of comments about, what about Javian Hawkins? People asking, could he be, the next James Robinson? Listen, it's not every year that you have an undrafted free agent running back that just breaks out and dominates in fantasy. So the overwhelmingly likely outcome here is that there is no James Robinson this year or next year or the year after that. Like, it just doesn't happen very often, and I'm not saying Javian Hawkins can't be good, but if they really thought he was all that good, if any team thought he was all that good, he'd have been drafted. And if Atlanta really wanted to use him ahead of Mike Davis, they would have drafted him, right? So it's very unlikely that he's going to be the guy. Wouldn't even be shocked if there's a scenario where he gets cut. We don't know that he's all that good, and it's not a good running back class, and he didn't get drafted. That should kind of tell you a lot. But I'm basically, in this backfield, expecting one of two things. Either they enter the season with their current running backs, in which case Mike Davis is an absolute stud, or they bring in a free agent, in which case we're going to have to reevaluate based on who they bring in, but it's very unlikely we'll care all that much because there really just aren't any free agents that we're very scared of. And the one thing I want to go over here is that Atlanta's coming off a season where they just threw the ball 39 times per game, which was the fourth most in the NFL. Then they added Kyle Pitts. They spent a third and a fourth round pick on the offensive line, and so far have only added Mike Davis as a legitimate running back. This team's going to throw the ball about 40 times per game, and their defense is bad enough to where we could see an outlier season where they're forced to throw the ball 41, 42 times per game. And that might feel like bad news for their running backs, but receptions are everything in fantasy, even if you're playing in a half PPR format, not even in full PPR. And we know that Mike Davis is very, very good in the receiving game. So don't be scared that they might not run the ball a ton. And don't think that because, he's 28 years old and he doesn't have a lot of history being a good running back on the ground, it doesn't matter that much. Sure, he's not going to approach 250 carries, but no one's expecting that, and we don't need that in fantasy. He had 59 receptions last year, and if he's the starter at the beginning of the year, we got to think he's going to eclipse that number. He's going to do more work on the ground as well. He's going to have scoring opportunities, and so with every week that goes by and they don't add someone, he becomes a stronger and a stronger pick, and his risk gets lower and lower. And again, if they enter the season with him clearly as the lead back, we are absolutely targeting him everywhere. Swinging back over to wide receiver, let's talk about Marvin Jones. And I think a lot of you are going to be very, very surprised about my take here because I love Laviska. I think he's an exceptional talent. But there are a lot of reasons to like Marvin Jones this season. First, we can look at production. It's the best thing to look at when you're trying to evaluate someone in the future is, well, what have they done in the past? Because we can talk about how talented we think someone is and how good we think they could be. But if someone has consistently already produced, that's a pretty good indicator that they could do so in the future. He's a wide receiver 51 off the board right now. He's been the wide receiver 47, 40, 11, 28, 19, and 21 in points per game since 2015. So he's been a top 30 wide receiver in points per game 4 straight years, and he's going as a wide receiver 51. Another very, very important thing to look at is who brought him in. How did he get to the Jaguars? The old regime is gone. They fired their GM last November, and with that, their entire coaching staff was replaced. They were able to play out the rest of the season, but they replaced the entire coaching staff this year. They've got Urban Meyer now at head coach, so Doug Marrone is gone. And they just brought in a whole new coaching staff around him. New quarterback coaches, wide receiver coaches, all of that. So yes, Chark and Laviska are young, talented players that they've taken early in the draft. But the they part of that is gone. This new coaching staff has no allegiance to these players. And so I see this new staff giving Marvin Jones a 2-year contract with $9 million guaranteed. And I have to imagine that they see him as an important part of this offense, especially getting that kind of money in an offseason that was not kind to wide receivers. This wasn't an offseason where it's like, oh, every wide receiver is getting paid. It was like, don't care how good you are, you're not getting that much as a receiver. Ask Juju what he thought the market was going to be and then what it turned out to be. So when they spend this kind of money on him, they clearly view him as a player they want, and having already had Laviska and Chark. Because it'd be one thing if it was Detroit. Right? If Detroit had spent that kind of money, it's like, okay, well, they have no one. They have to play someone wide receiver. The Jaguars could have gone into the season having Chark and Laviska and having maybe paid like a very low-end receiver, as like a third option. But they didn't. They got a guy who's produced in the past, paid him money. I don't know. I think to me it says that they want him to be a part of basically every play. And we usually talk about chemistry, right? We're always like, okay, but how's he going to gel with the new quarterback? How's he going to learn the new system? Remember, they drafted Lawrence, and it's going to be a whole new offense. So no one has a leg up. It's not like Chark and Laviska have a leg up because they've been working with the quarterback. They know the offense. New offense, new quarterback. Everyone is on an even playing field. And again, I like Chark as a player, but he's going kind of early. So then we backed up into Laviska. We said, no, he's the better value. But even him, he gets a little bit of hype, and there is still concern that ETN is going to take a little bit of the role that Laviska had. Well, why don't we just move one step further? Take the cheapest wide receiver, the one they clearly value. That's probably the one we should be targeting. So I am now making Marvin Jones a target on the website and someone that I am going after in drafts, and hopefully he doesn't get too much buzz. The final player we'll go over today is Matthew Stafford. And if you've watched the channel, you got to imagine he was going to be on the list. I just want everyone to remember a time before Matt Patricia came to town and what was one of the worst head coach signings I have ever seen. From 2011 to 2017, Stafford played 100% of his possible games, averaging 625 pass attempts, 4,564 passing yards, 28 touchdowns, and 17.8 fantasy points per game. Then we see Patricia come to town, and he's averaged 16 fantasy points per game since. And that might not seem like a lot. You're like, okay, he went down like 1.8 fantasy points per game. Well, that is literally the difference last season between Matt Ryan and Teddy Bridgewater. It's dropping from the quarterback 13 to the quarterback 24. That's not great, okay? And now he has Sean McVay as a head coach. And while McVay has definitely been overhyped at times, he is still a significant upgrade over Patricia. I mean, look at what McVay was able to do with Goff. Over the last 3 years, Goff has averaged 37 pass attempts, 282 yards, 1.75 touchdowns per game, finishing as a quarterback 10, 13, and 25 in points per game. You're like, Nick, 25 is awful. What do you mean, what's he done? Well, basically, McVay was trying to make Goff work over those 2 seasons. And he's like, you know what? This is ridiculous. Like, we can't consistently win with Goff because he's just not that good. And so they basically said, let's try and run the ball more. Let's make things easier on Goff, turn him more into a game manager, limit his downfield work. They dropped his total pass attempts, his yards per attempt, his adjusted net yards per attempt. Everything went down, and again, just turned him into a game manager trying to win with the defense and the ground game. And you know what? It did work to some degree. They made the playoffs. They beat Seattle. Of course, they fell to the Packers, but they had like a decent season, again, with Goff at quarterback. And Stafford, I need everyone to understand that he's absolutely a better quarterback than Jared Goff. And I fully expect them to go back to their 2019 numbers when they're throwing the ball 39, 40 times per game, assuming these are games that they're not just destroying. I think they're going to be a really, really good team. So the one risk here is that they just get up a ton and they're running the ball in the second half. But you know what? To get up a ton, they're going to score. And I think a lot of their production is going to come through the air as they're getting up. So even if they're winning games and they're running the ball a ton in the fourth quarter, they had to get to that point. And I think Stafford is what's going to get them there. He's got 75 career games with at least 39 pass attempts, averaging 316 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 16-week pace that's over 5,000 yards and 32 touchdowns, just to give you like a sense of what he's done when you give him the pass attempts. Now, I totally understand the argument that those numbers are a little bit skewed since he was playing with Megatron. And I get that. That's why I'm not expecting a top 5 season from Stafford. But Stafford is certainly in the top 10 conversation, and he's one of those quarterbacks that I'm okay breaking our rule. Remember, we kind of went to the offseason with the rule of we need mobility. You've got to be able to get me something with your leg, or else you're not able to produce high-end seasons. Stafford is the exception here. I think he can have, with 17 weeks, would it shock me if he broke the passing yardage record? Because, getting that free week in there wouldn't shock me. Not predicting it to happen, although maybe I will in the bold takes section of the offseason. But I think he's going to have a phenomenal season. And he's the one quarterback that we're breaking the rule with. If you want to draft Matthew Stafford and forego the needs rushing production, go for it. Because I think the Rams are going to be awesome this year. I think a lot of that is coming from Stafford. So that is it for my favorite players to target who have changed teams. I'll probably do the opposite of this video next week as well. Although, I've already done Fuller recently, so we're going to try and throw some new names in there. If you're looking for more content, then our draft package has been live for a while now, and it's consistently being updated. I've added the risk ratings for every single player the other week, and so you can see that along with our tiered rankings, current ADPs, targets, avoids, sleepers, with video breakdowns coming soon. And if you want to find that, it's all available at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.